Hereditary is a 2018 horror thriller starring Toni Collette, who serves up a 5-star meal as Annie Graham, a wife and mother struggling with the recent loss of her own estranged mother. It tackles not only the complicated mess of Annie's life and her attempts to escape the lingering shadow of her overbearing, manipulative, and judgmental mother, but also larger forces at play, including the pressures of matriarchy and womanhood, and beyond that, the larger patriarchal curse that haunts Annie throughout the film. As we see, in the end, Annie isn't the main character in her own story. With that said, let's dig in. Annie gives a disjointed eulogy at her mother's funeral, with many unfamiliar faces in attendance. She's joined by her husband, Steve Graham, a psychiatrist, her son Peter, and her daughter Charlie, who seems to be mentally disturbed or perhaps neurodivergent in some sort of manner. Charlie witnesses a woman lingering over her grandmother's casket. At home, Annie checks on her daughter, who wonders who will take care of her now that her grandmother is gone. Annie reassures her before leaving and going through her mother's things and finding the aforementioned note, which is a foreshadowing of things to come: heart-wrenching tragedy and sacrifice. Peter daydreams through the discussion going on about Heracles and basically predestination, and Charlie cuts the head off of a dead bird who hit her classroom window, while in a lot across the street, an elderly woman watches. At home, Annie sees her mother's room is open, and a black triangle, seemingly burnt into the wood floor, is exposed. She asks her husband about it, and he reassures her by locking the room. And I will make note here of the offness of their marriage. It seems strangely platonic on both their ends, but we'll put a pin in it as Dr. Graham receives word from the cemetery that the grave has been desecrated. He hides this fact from Annie, and she decides to go to a movie. The movie turns out to be a group meeting with people struggling to deal with the loss of a loved one. Annie details the tragic and off-putting history between her and her mother, and her own attempts to escape her mother's matriarchal domineering, and her insertion into Annie's own nuclear family. This is possibly detailed in one of Annie's miniatures of her holding a newborn baby in her room, seemingly breastfeeding, with her mother standing over her with one of her own breasts out like she's offering instruction, and the pressure on the Graham family increases. Charlie is drawn outside by a mysterious pulsing light into the woods where in the distance an old woman sits in front of a fire. Annie chastises her, brings her back inside, and tells her she's going to a party with her brother. Charlie resists and doesn't want to go, and her mother makes her go anyway. For the sake of time, I'll save the extra commentary, including all future clues, for the end of the video where I'll try to put it all together in an explanation. Peter attempts to woo his crush at the party, leaving his sister to eat chocolate cake while he smokes with her and 2 other guys. It's clear she really doesn't have the time of day for him. But Charlie has a nut allergy. And in a horrific turn of events, as they race down the empty road towards a hospital to prevent her death due to allergic reaction, Peter swerves to avoid a deer in the road, and Charlie, once again more on this later, who is hanging her head out the window, is brutally killed, her head striking a utility pole. In shock, Peter drives home, goes upstairs and to bed, and in the morning, Annie finds the headless body of her only daughter in the backseat of a car. As Toni Collette proves she was snubbed for a Best Actress nomination, Peter listens from the shadows in the hallway. After the funeral, Annie is distant, avoiding both her husband by sleeping in the treehouse at night and her son Peter. She watches him from the car only a few feet away, hiding in the dark front seat so he doesn't see her as he works up the nerve to go inside, probably to speak to her. She drives to a meeting and reconsiders, leaving before going inside. And she's stopped before leaving the parking lot by a woman named Joan, who gives her her contact information and an invitation to talk about the grief of losing children. She finally does. During their talk, after speaking about Charlie, Joan asks about her relationship with her son, which is now strained to the point of breaking, but has been bad for some time. She details coming from a sleepwalking stupor with a match and an empty can of paint thinner, with all three of them covered head to toe in it. And the way she speaks about the incident, like Peter is making a mountain out of a molehill, is something I'll touch on later. After her husband walks in on her working on a miniature of the accident that took their daughter's life, including the bloody head lying in the road, he becomes very visibly agitated at her behavior. This leads to the dinner scene, the scene I remember most vividly from the only other time I watched this movie. It starts with subtle manipulation from Annie as she pretends the elephant in the room isn't there, quietly punishing Peter, nudging him in the only direction he can go, which is to have an emotional outburst, and in turn, she explodes on him in anger. But as Annie comes completely undone, verbally unleashing on Peter, he isn't surprised, he's terrified, clearly. And Toni Collette is terrifying. Throughout the film, she drifts from cold and aloof to stern to seething rage and hatred, and with a single, extremely important question, the rage that she's displaying turns into hatred.
What about you, Mom?
All right, we're stopping this right now. Set.
I said stop right now.
Fine.
Steve stops her from saying whatever she was going to say next, but my God, look at that face. Wow. Again, Annie encounters Joan, who is ecstatic. She has a solution. A seance, where she summons the spirit of her dead grandson. Annie is emotionally overwhelmed, and Joan stops the seance, giving Annie instructions on how to do it for herself, in her own home, including words in a language neither of them know. That night, after tossing and turning, Annie wakes, following a trail of ants to Peter's room, where she finds him, dead in his bed, ants swarming over him, pouring from his mouth. And then he wakes and finds her standing there. Peter once again asks an important question, and the answers he gets are brutal. Annie never wanted to have him, but her mother, Ellen, pressured her to do so. She tried to have a miscarriage, any way she knew how, and it didn't work. Annie wakes Peter up from his nightmare, telling him she's so sorry for the things that she said. She brings him downstairs to do the ritual Joan told her about, which Steve is vehemently against, and we can see Annie becoming more manic, more desperate for them to see that it works. And to Steve's dismay, it does. Charlie or something moves the glass. Annie slumps and something seems to reanimate her body as she begins crying out for mommy, further traumatizing Peter. Steve splashes water on her face and she immediately comes to. From here, the end approaches rapidly. Annie wakes and goes to her daughter's room, which is already open, her notepad laying on the bed, and drawings appear as she stands there. Peter wakes to see Charlie standing in the corner of his room before her head falls off in the shadows, rolling into the light as a ball. And when he lays back, hands grab his head, attempting to yank it off. He wakes to find Annie, who calms him, trying to convince him that she wasn't attacking him, that she wasn't trying to kill him, and that actually something sinister is going on, and she's the only one who can stop it. She takes Charlie's journal, attempts to burn it before she herself begins to catch fire, and she pulls the journal out. She goes to find Joan, who of course doesn't answer, and we see inside the apartment, covered in white fabric, which is important. And we see familiar items on the table, not unlike those Charlie was seen with before. Joan is part of the cult her mother was a part of, and the ritual involving Peter is almost complete. Peter at school sees Joan across the street chanting an invocation at him. It's clear that he's the only one who can hear her, as no one else has a reaction to this screaming woman. Annie finds the hard evidence she's looking for, as Joan has been in her mother's life, and thus her life, for years and years. She finds information on the object of the cult's worship, a demon named Paiman. For some reason, she decides to head into the attic and finds her mother's headless, decomposing body in her burial gown, lying beneath Paiman's sigil. In class, Peter hears tongue clicks, not unlike the verbal tick Charlie had, and not unlike the sound Annie heard in her car riding back from the first seance with Joan, before his arm raises violently, contorted, and his head slams into the desk as he shakes, and then slams down again, breaking his nose, before he resurfaces, crying out and screaming in absolute terror. And I will insert this here, as a person who doesn't watch a lot of horror and who struggled through their first watch of this movie, it really is super intense and extremely uncomfortable. Steve hears about what happened to Peter, picks him up from school, and in the car on the way home, he breaks down in tears at a red light. Fuck, man. Annie meets him in the driveway, hysterical, and Steve is not having any of her distress. She convinces him to go into the attic, and he sees the body, as she explains that the seance brought something into the house, and she needs to stop it because it's after Peter, and that thing is linked with Charlie's sketchbook. After begging and pleading to Steve to destroy the sketchbook, which she believes will kill her, he protests, and she throws the sketchbook into the fire herself, setting Steve ablaze. She watches him burn and has a complete mental break. And it's time to finally bring Paiman into the world and destroy Peter. Peter wakes, and I'm going to be 100% honest. I had to take a break before this scene even started as soon as I saw Annie. Peter walks through the empty house and sees the charred body of his burnt father staged by the fireplace for him to see, before in the background, in a doorway, a naked cultist appears, smiling sinisterly. Peter finally sees his mother clinging to the ceiling. She chases him to the attic, and he locks himself inside as she repeatedly slams her skull against the closed door of the attic. He looks around to see more cultists and a ritually prepared resting place for a body, with his picture in the center. And finally, above him, in the rafters, in the most gruesome scene of the movie, Annie levitates, staring intensely at Peter as she slowly saws her own head off with a string. Peter hurls himself out of the window and lands on the lawn before getting up after a while and making his way into the treehouse, where the cult is bowed, waiting for the coronation. He looks around to see the posed body of his grandmother and that of his mother, both beheaded, both on their hands and knees before him, as he stares at an effigy of Paiman himself, with the face of his dead sister Charlie. Joan places the crown on his head as he continues to stare, his mouth slowly opening with an indiscernible emotion spreading across his face. The ritual is complete. The cycle has ended. Wow. What a film. So, there are several things I want to break down. Firstly, the setup of the cult is interesting, and I think that the fact that the cult, created by Annie's mother, is kind of de facto matriarchal, that Ellen, who is a clearly driven and capable individual, dedicates herself to being basically a footstool to King Paiman, to serve the ultimate purpose of birthing a male vessel into the world. I mean, I guess Paiman could certainly be seen as like a patriarchal demon, as he can't reach his full potential in a female body, and in fact, hates being in a female body. The themes continue with Annie representing like fears about motherhood and matrimony, but let's get all the way into it because I hold a different position about some of these things than most of the people I've seen. Annie knew what was going on in a strictly factual sense and chose to bury it under insane levels of denial and arrogance to the point where it seemed unconscious. And I think that the movie supports this. From the beginning of the film, Paiman is influencing the Graham family. Not only are many establishing shots in the film miniatures to symbolize the world the Grahams are in is like really not of their own control, that this world isn't random, it's a meticulously prepared line of dominoes. Paiman is inside Charlie from the moment she is born. Charlie still exists, but Charlie is the demon Paiman. And Ari Aster, writer and director, said there never was a Charlie to begin with. And I interpret that as essentially Charlie is a vessel prepared to like incubate Paiman, but Paiman doesn't know that he's not human. He only knows Charlie. He only knows life as Charlie. Annie's husband is a psychiatrist, and at least in early drafts of the script, from my understanding, Annie was his patient before they became romantically involved, and then that didn't make into the actual film. Annie's actions throughout the film can be interpreted through the discussion in the classroom about Heracles and the fatal flaw. They outline that flaw as arrogance because Heracles refuses to see all of the signs around him that are literally thrust into his face. And the teacher clarifies that Heracles doesn't have a choice and asks the classroom whether him not knowing makes it more tragic. This question is for us, the watcher. Annie's the hero, not Steve, and definitely not Peter. Her fatal flaw can certainly be characterized as arrogance, and the signs that something is terribly wrong are all around her. Because I want to point out, there's no way possible that she was not involved in the cult as a child. And in fact, she is wearing Paiman's symbol on a necklace during the funeral. After the funeral, she comforts her daughter, and when Charlie remarks that her grandmother wanted her to be a boy, she ignores it, even though we know what Annie knows. She even ignores the word satiny that Charlie, or occultist, has scribbled on the wall before going to open a box of her mother's things to look at pictures of Charlie as a baby. She closes it and opens another book on top of the pile, Notes on Spiritualism. It is 100% clear to me that she has seen this book and this note before. I guarantee it. The face she makes isn't one of curiosity, it's one of remembrance. She opens the photo album to look at pictures of Charlie, and she opens his book to look at the note because they reference each other. They are attached. When she walks by her grandmother's room and sees the black triangle carved in the floor, she ignores it. I'm pretty sure the script says she's seen it many times. It's clear she knows her mother was up to no good by the details we learn from her monologue. Her brother Charlie killed himself at 16, which is the same age Peter is now. He accused Ellen, the matriarch, of trying to put people inside him. And Annie says, of course he blamed her, because she is paralleling her brother Charles's relationship with their mother to her relationship with her son Peter. She is scoffing because she must. Because if her mother is responsible for Charles committing suicide, if she is a monster, then that means that she too is a monster for what she did to Peter and Charlie. Because, once again, if she admits why she tried to kill her children, then she admits to the whole thing, to the whole shebang. Importantly, she says her mother lived with him for a period of years before she went into hospice care. This would have been sometime after Peter was born, as she ensures the audience knows she wouldn't let her mother anywhere near Peter after he was born. And the only reason she would do that is if she knows what her mother wants and what she's doing. Her husband enforced a no-contact rule that lasted 3 years because she was pregnant with Charlie. She then reveals that she let her mother have Charlie because Charlie was a girl, further cementing that she knows that her mother was after Peter in the same way she was after her own son Charles. And she just is in deep denial about it. It is further implied that Ellen is the one that named Charlie after her dead son. That miniature that I said detailed Annie breastfeeding Charlie is actually her mother breastfeeding Charlie, as she says that she wouldn't allow Annie to do it, that she fed her herself. I mean, there's photos of Ellen bottle feeding Charlie, which apparently those bottles were suffused with the same herb that Joan puts into Annie's tea before the seance, an herb that makes one more susceptible to demon possession. Annie feels blamed, although she cannot articulate what she feels blamed for. This is a lie. She knows what she feels blamed for. She just laid out the history of her mother, a cult leader, destroying her brother's life, and then setting sights on her own. First her son Peter, who she was able to protect, but because her mother's hold and influence is so strong, Annie relents with her second child, allows her mother back into their lives, back into her home where she was obviously performing rituals, as evidenced by the carved triangle pointing north in her mother's room. She essentially allows her mother to take her daughter from her as a sacrifice to keep her away from Peter, because in the end, she knows her mother wants to put something inside him. And now she fears, looking back at the past, that her mother instead put that thing into her daughter. While Peter smokes a joint, the treehouse is framed behind him. The window is directly level with Peter's room, and there is someone watching Peter from the treehouse. I mean, their breath is visible in the air. Now, this is most assuredly the cult. Now, in the attic, her mother is, I believe it's in the same burial gown she, wore during the funeral scene. This all white garb. And the cult has also been in Ellen's room, as I'm assuming part of the ritual, as her bed is moved, so Annie can see that black triangle she's seen before in the first place. Charlie is drawn outside by this pulse of blue light, which, as I understood it, is Paiman. Now, she sees a woman in the field surrounded by fire. This is Ellen, as I understand it. Annie drags her back to the house, scolding her for being outside barefoot, and orders her to go to a high school party. And they pass a pole with Paiman's symbol on it, and on the way back, Charlie is decapitated by it. That's, that's one that everyone knows. Now, this, of course, is a setup by the cult, who, once again, have been watching the family. And in fact, I think I've heard some people say that they heard what sounded like someone giggling or laughing. I didn't hear it, but, I can't keep watching this movie. I need my brain. I think it was simply time to release Paiman from the inferior vessel where he had been incubating. Because, once again, Peter is 16. Perhaps that has something to do with like an optimal age for a male host. I think 16 and 16 is still like an interesting parallel, that they were both 16 years old. Now, the cake must have been purposeful. I think the entire circumstance was just a demonstration to the viewer that there are cult members that we don't know about engineering circumstances to play their part in the ritual as well. And I think that Charlie was compelled to hang her head out the window to get air while he's influencing events. He doesn't know that he's influencing events. That has to be the case, that he compels himself to stick his head out the window to behead himself, so he can be free of this inferior body. Because it's, maybe demons have a subconscious or whatever, but I mean, that has to be the case. I don't know why it's always like the dinner scene where like the big emotional blow-ups have to happen, but it all comes apart because Peter, who has been iced out by his mother, says thank you to his father. And all this resentment and anger that she has towards Peter, like backed up by all the trauma from her mother and her own upbringing, and the weight of the tragedy that they are all trying to bury without acknowledging, all that comes out. She snickers at him and mocking the thank you, and he tells her to unburden herself because clearly she has something she wants to say. And she talks about how she has protected him, how she has worried about him, and how all she has gotten in return is disdain and resentment and that fucking face on your face. Now, I've seen some people saying maybe she's seeing the sneer that Peter sees later in his reflection, but I doubt that. I think it's supposed to be like metaphorical. Like, the other buried thing besides the tragic loss of Charlie is that Annie almost killed herself and her children, dousing all three of them in paint thinner, and he has been afraid of her ever since. Which is funny because if we want to take the sneer literally, then what she's seeing isn't Peter actually sneering. She's seeing what Peter will become, which is a vessel for Paiman, which he feels worthless and unloved and disconnected from her, and she knows this, which is why she punishes him by freezing him out. So, like, he stops holding back as well, and he decides to hurt her. If she's angry about no one admitting what they've done, what about her? Why was Charlie at the party if she didn't want to go? I think the scene where Annie follows the trail of ants into Peter's room to see them covering his corpse is her nightmare, but that the second part of that, when Peter wakes up to see her standing there, is his nightmare, and that they fit together seamlessly. Perhaps there's some sort of subconscious thing going on, not just with the sleepwalking, when she originally wants to kill Peter and Charlie and herself, but perhaps there's like some dream thing going on where in their subconscious they're more in control, more awake, more real versions of themselves than they are when they're awake. Which is also why I know that it's Peter's nightmare, because the stuff that she says is the stuff that he's afraid of. Now, I saw some people say when Peter wakes up, Annie asks, is Charlie there? Because she's reliving the headless moment and that Peter is actually Charlie in this sequence. But I don't think that this makes sense. Peter's nightmare is that his mother never wanted him, and that also she wants to kill him, which both of these things are true. In general, it's true. She never wanted to be a mother, or at least definitely never felt comfortable being a mother, never felt like one, felt like she was fulfilling a role as both a mother and a wife, and that these were things that she felt that she was compelled to do. And when Peter first becomes aware of the blue light and gets picked up from school, Steve calls her, and she mentions Charlie again. But I don't think that she's talking about her daughter. I don't think she's slipping up and mentioning her dead daughter. She gets called because Peter says that he feels like there's a presence pursuing him. And then she says whatever she says about Charlie. And I'm thinking that she's subconsciously remembering her brother Charles, as he would have been experiencing the same kinds of symptoms Peter's experiencing now. So, like, I feel like some of this is like a Birdman kind of situation where when we see things from certain POVs, it's not what's happening. And specifically with things that happen inside the home. Now, I also believe that she is being compelled not just by Paiman, but by the spirit of her mother. I also believe that after Charlie's death, the drawings in the notebook are done by Annie. When she burns the book and her sleeve catches on fire, I believe this to be manipulation by Paiman. There are alternate explanations where both she and Steve are like tethered to the book, and Paiman tricks Annie into thinking that destroying the book will only kill her. But I have an alternate explanation. And to me, the two pieces that she made for Annie and for Charles look like prayer pillows or cushions for sitting on the floor, which is why I believe that they both took part in cult activities from a young age. Once again, she discovers the body and immediately shines her light on Paiman's symbol in the darkness, like she knows exactly where it is. Okay, when Annie pleads with Steve, which leads to his eventual accidental death, completely breaking her down, I think she's hallucinating. Only because, by the way she understands it and by the way I understand it, the person who is bound to the book will be destroyed when it goes into the fire, right? So, if this is the case, she simply doesn't need Steve to do anything unless I'm just completely misreading this scene. Like, she herself could just throw the book into the fire. because like she would die either way. Like if this is her remembering the events that happened at night when Steve was on the couch and she put the book into the fire and her arm caught on fire, if she's rationalizing it that way, she can just throw it into the fire and commit suicide herself, and then that's that. But I think something else happens. I think that she burns Steve herself. I think that the evidence of that is the unnecessary fuel. You could just throw it into the fire. Why do you need to pour fuel on it before you burn the notebook? I think the fuel is there because she douses him in the fuel. I believe that she doused him in whatever that is, and she burns him with that. And then like after she does it, she is still horrified, but because her mind is breaking, and then it finally completely breaks. And then that blue light goes over her. She goes like dummy numb or whatever. When Peter wakes up and like finds the body, which has been staged, she like, she chases Peter and like she seemingly trips, which allows him time to get into the attic. And I think this is basically the last willful act we'll see Annie take. But, this too is a choice that is not really a choice, as Peter was always destined to go into that attic because he's being driven by the same force she is. Peter was under like demonic oppression, which is, I think, like physically the demons doing shit to him or whatever. But yeah, I think he was destined to go into the attic because that's where the last sacrifice is set up. And this is where Peter's body is supposed to be expelled, which I think he's supposed to be expelled literally in that circle or whatever. Like there's a picture of him there in the thing. I think that's where he's supposed to be expelled. I don't think he was supposed to, jump out of the window, but that works either way as well. To like try and allow him to get away, which doesn't work, of course, because it's too late. All of this stuff is predestined. It's all working out the way it's supposed to, no matter what they do. And then in the attic, when she's levitating and sawing her head off, she is also like staring at, and once again, like people are saying, oh, did Peter die and da 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 da, and like that's just not possible, because if Peter's dead, then Charles killing himself those years ago wouldn't have deprived Paiman of a body. Like it has to be just his soul getting expelled. Now, when he goes into the treehouse to become part of the ceremony or to get praised or whatever, we see Charlie's head mounted on a golden idol of Paiman. And it's like a crude and deformed looking, like a effigy kind of thing, maybe representing like Paiman's incomplete form, with the headless bodies of Ellen and Annie. Like these three sacrifices, three heads, a daughter, a mother, and a grandmother, a trinity of sacrifices. 3 generations of women sacrificed to bring Paiman a male body. And interestingly, there's like a bird in a cage flapping its wings. And could this be Peter's expelled soul? I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe if you want to throw that in there, that'd be cool. And, Joan informs Paiman of who he is, having previously been born into the world through Charlie, and only, of course, knowing himself as Charlie. He can now, like, truly be Paiman for the first time because he's in a male body for the first time ever. As the film draws to a close with the cult bowed before him, it seems that Paiman is, like, starting to remember who he is. So, that's all I got for you. This video is already too long. I mean, what a movie. What a film. 10 out of 10, we'll never watch again. Alright? I'll see you guys later. Peace.
Congratulations. You made it. We all knew it was going to be you. It was always meant for you. And we are all so proud of you.